Hi, friends. Happy New Year and welcome back to the Transverse, to the Transgender Show. I'm your host, Emily. I'm very excited to kick off season 5 tonight. We've been doing this for 5 years. Crazy. It doesn't seem like 5 years because it's 2024 and I started in 2020, but the math checks out somehow. So trust me. It's wonderful to be here with y'all again and to have y'all here with me. I hope you're having a great start to your new year. Only a couple days in, but I think it's gonna be a good one. I'm gonna fix my hair before we move too much further. Got some weird, that one. There we go. Some weird little lumpies. I was having really good hair earlier, and I'm hoping we can get back to that because my hair's nice. I'm very excited tonight to be back here with y'all doing the Transgender Show, and also to welcome in my guest, Sami Flair. Sami is a streamer and sports fan living in the middle of an odd Venn diagram where being transgender and being a classically trained theologian intersect. As such, she's constantly acting as the arbiter of peace in her own microcosm of chaos and contradiction. She's an open book who thrives on helping people on a gender journey to walk their own authentic path. Everyone, welcome to the show, Sami.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you here. It's wonderful to kick off the new year with you here and a new season, all the good things, starting fresh, and I'm very excited about it.
Indeed. Happy New Year. Excited to be here. Excited for everything that this year holds. And hey, congrats on kicking off year number 5.
Yes, thank you so much. Before we get in, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. There's some house cleaning that needs to be done, but we're not going to do that on stream here. Our guest cannot see the chat, but please keep your comments and questions coming in through the chat, and we will get to those after our break. We're going to go through about an hour's worth of questions and discussion here, and then we'll take our break and come back and ask all of your questions. Anything that you ask, as long as it's within reason, as long as you're not trolling and being a jerk, then we'll get to all of your questions. As I said, Sami proclaims to be an open book, so we might get a chance to test that today and find out if that is indeed true. And I'm an open book as well. Ask me absolutely any question that you'd like throughout the show. And again, we'll get to that after the break. Is there anything else? God, it's been so long since I've done this show now. It's been a couple months, so taking a break is a tough thing to do.
But a necessary thing to do.
It can be, yeah. It wasn't intentional, but then when I didn't have a lineup of guests and I was kind of struggling to find people and get the responses and everything, I wasn't super bummed that it wasn't happening. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I get it.
So before we get into this serious stuff, and maybe we should save this for after the break, but I like throwing a monkey wrench into my own plan here. What are some of the things that you have set out for yourself for this new year to make it awesome? What are you trying to accomplish this year?
Oh gosh. This year in particular, I can already peer a little bit in the future and say that it's going to be a year of change for me. And so some of this is starting right now with my approach to social media platforms and how to use them in a more responsible manner and not necessarily be at the whim of getting caught up in trends, so on and so forth. Some of that is indeed not getting drawn into arguments as easily as I have in the past. But me personally, I'm trying to kind of establish a new direction in general for my life. I think a lot of people had their priorities reset with the pandemic and everything that came along with that, including a social life, how we relate to other people, our professions, so much of everything. And so it's more a continuation of that for me, of what asking myself continuously, what do I want my life to become and what can I do in the here and now to get there? Because not all of those things are things that are going to happen in 3 months, 6 months, in 2024. Some of it's years down the road. So what tangible steps can I be taking right now to help myself along so that future Sami is pleased with where current present Sami is and what she was doing at this point in time.
I love it. Yeah, setting a good plan. That's a good way to attack that. I love it. I hope I can do that this year too. I definitely desperately need to. So here's hoping that I can actually get the plan together. And some of that, just what are the steps to get there? Quit focusing so much on the goal and trying to get to the goal, and focus on the steps, and you know sort of the eat the elephant type of a thing, one bite at a time. I love it.
Exactly. You don't train for a marathon by going out and walking 26 miles immediately. Like you do it in chunks and
Mm,
eventually you work your way up to that.
that's a good analogy. I'll have to think about that one too, because I also like in that, built into training for a marathon, you you run a couple miles, and then you run a few more miles, and then I think you get up to like 10 miles, and then you run 5 miles. Whereas, you stretch it a little bit, but then you kind of come back. I think there's something in that. I'll have to process that in my brain. Let's move on. Let's get everything
Okay.
started here. The first question that I love to ask in this is, how did you choose your name?
Sammy is actually an homage to someone I never got the timing right with. It always seemed that we were generally headed in the same direction, albeit on very different paths. And I would like to think in a different life that I would have ended up with her, but we still remain good friends to this day as much as we possibly can. There's distance involved, and it's always difficult to keep up friendships and relationships over distance. So it's still there, but yeah, she was one of those people that I always look to as this is someone who knows how to take on the world, and when she doesn't know how to take on the world, it doesn't stop her. So it seemed to fit. Maybe not necessarily for where I was at that point in time when I chose the name, but for where I would like to be further on down the road. I like to think that I'm making good on that.
Seems like a common theme for you, planning ahead, doing the things now that'll get you to where you want to be in the future. You have a,
Trying.
you have a, you have a connection with that person still. You still talk to her regularly?
Not as regularly as I would like.
Hmm.
As I said, we were headed on the same general direction of life, and eventually our paths started to veer. And part of that started when she moved away from where we lived a couple years ahead of when I did, and then she got her career started, and then I believe she's married at this point. So um, her priorities have changed, which 100% makes sense to me. But I do my best to make sure that we stay in communication whenever possible.
And so, have you had any kind of conversation about the name and the fact that your name is an homage to her? And how has that gone?
We haven't had that conversation. We might at some point. You just never know how people are necessarily going to take it. It's one thing to say if you're going to name your child after somebody, they're going to take that as a tremendous gesture and like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much I meant to you. That's incredible. Thank you. I hope I get to meet your child at some point. But when you're talking about something that is as dicey as gender identity and selecting a new name and transition, you don't quite know how people are going to react on that level. So we haven't crossed that bridge yet. We're going to at some point, and hopefully she takes it as well intentioned as I mean it.
Okay, one more side note. I did notice a note in chat that said something about a show on YouTube at 7:44 p.m. I don't know if that's Pacific or what. The thought that just occurred to me is that we might be stepping on an all on the table show. There might have been a little bit of a miscommunication. Does anybody in chat have Jen Giggle's contact information? Can anybody reach out to her? No, it was something else. Okay. Just wanted to make sure. So, okay.
I'll step on any toes.
Yeah. So that's how you chose your name. Where did your username Sami Flair come from? Where did the Flair part pop into this?
I tell this story a lot, and I'm always curious to see the reactions to it because everybody thinks that there's some epiphany that happened, or oh, like uh, are you making it out to be like a Ric Flair relative or something like that? And no, the truth is far stupider than that. It's quite literally that one night while I was asleep, I just woke up, just jumped out of bed, sat straight up, and literally just said the words "Sammy Flair," and then I went back to sleep. And I somehow recalled that the next morning. So there's no deep significance or meaning to the Flair title on that. It's just something that came to my mind and it stuck. So here we are.
Deeply rooted in your subconscious, something
That's
very
somewhere.
important. I love it. Oh man, it's been a long time since I've gotten to these questions here. When did you first realize that you were trans? That was the term that applied to you?
I like the way you phrase that in particular, because on some level, every trans person has some realization of it throughout their life, but they maybe don't have the words to articulate it. Maybe a certain term hasn't come into the general vernacular. Maybe it doesn't fit at that point in time. So, at least in the way that you phrased it, I would say it was within the last 3 years or so. And that was the result of my own gender identity and exploration, and talking with friends and talking with family, talking with my therapist as one of the most important people along this journey, and just recognizing that in our culture right now, you can throw around any gender identity term and it can be laced with not only a lack of nuance, but it can be laced with this idea of an immediate an immediate connection with something that you may not 100% identify with. And so I was a person that for a while kind of pushed back on this idea that, oh, I'm not going to use the word trans. I don't think that applies to me because in my experience and in the people that I know and in the culture that I grew up in, it meant this and I am not this. Well, lo and behold, it rings true that you oftentimes need somebody else who can help turn the metaphorical crystal and just say, "Have you looked at it from this angle?" And maybe you are correct in what this person thinks the word trans may mean, but that may not be what it means to you. It may not be what the definition in the book of psychology means. It may not mean a whole lot of other things. So you need to set that aside and just think more about what are the feelings that are attached to it, what's the connotation that comes with it, and what significance does that have for you further on down the road, rather than attaching yourself to a title that, as I already said, can be contentious in
Mm-hmm.
every social circle, and especially in a political landscape that is very charged and is only ramping up as far as trans issues are concerned.
Well, and the main reason I like to ask the question that way is I like to start closer to now, to where you're at now, how we got to here, and then because of the way my experience went, it was when I realized that what this all these things in my head that were happening that were confusing and all that, when I understood that I was transgender, then I was able to sort of trace things back, and there's now the puzzle pieces start to fit together. Things start to make
Yeah.
sense retroactively and kind of lead up. Whereas some people know when they're 3 years old that they're not the gender that people tell them they are. Other people like myself just feel like they don't understand the world. Like there's something wrong and I don't know what it is. And so I love looking at the journey from that perspective of, okay, you figured this out now. In going back, what were some of those things for you? What were some of the breadcrumbs that you see clearly now?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's relevant because these are ongoing conversations that I have with friends who have known me for a long time, with family members, with my mom in particular, um, that we're kind of tracing back through my life and saying, maybe we should have picked up on that as a clue back then. And I think everybody has those little things like, oh, I really identified with this pop culture character when I was younger, right? So it was a common theme that Bugs Bunny was a crossdresser, and that held my attention for some reason along the way. And different movies and TV shows and all that um, did kind of hold my attention for that very reason. But as far as like specific breadcrumbs, I'm thinking more about conversations that I had when I was younger. and maybe not conversations with people, even though some of them were, but conversations I was having with myself. Like, why could I never let go of this idea of, I wonder what it must be like to be a girl? And for kids, let's say at this point I'm 5, 6, 7 years old, you don't really entertain that thought for very long because you have the attention span of a peanut. So you're going to move on quickly to whatever the next thought is that pops into your head. And yet, as I sit here and think back to that 20 plus years ago, I recognize it as a prevalent thought that really never went away. It was something that was always stuck in the back of my mind and never got an answer to. Now, growing up in the South in the 90s in a very conservative culture and having grown up in the church, there's not a lot of safe spaces to ask those questions, even jokingly, because the immediate response is probably one of two things. It's either going to be mockery, oh, what a great joke, or it's going to be condemnation. And really, neither of those are healthy or helpful for somebody that doesn't realize the implications of what they're asking. Now, of course, what person is going to look at a 5, 6, 7 year old and say, oh my gosh, they're struggling with their gender identity? It's much more likely that they're going to look at that child and say, it's a passing thought. We don't need to entertain it. But again, in conversations with my mom, we're like, yeah, we probably should have talked about this more. We probably should have figured it out along the way, but we can't go back in the past and fix that. So what do we do with it now? And it's just funny to me to sit and have more of these conversations, and people would be like, "Oh yeah, I guess that doesn't surprise me about you in hindsight. Do you think you could have told me, a decade or more ago, please?"
Yeah, some of that early evidence would have been helpful. I it's really fascinating what you brought up there, and it's something that I hadn't thought of. Is in the moment as a kid, yeah, with that short attention span, there's a lot of things that pop in, and it's more the clue later on in life when you look back, because we've had billions of thoughts,
Yeah.
and most of them fall away, and we forget about them, but the things that stand out, the things that we do remember, are the bigger clues.
Yeah, I have a 7-year-old nephew and a 3-year-old nephew, and my brother and sister-in-law will tell me all the time about the ridiculous conversations that they have in the car on the way to school, and how it just is that tremendous mental gymnastics of, we need to talk about, did you pack my lunch for today? Great. What happens if I go to the hospital? Why did that come into your mind? I don't know, but let's quickly move on to the next topic. And so, again, from that perspective, it makes total sense to me why somebody wouldn't give a ton of attention to any one individual thought. But I think with that in hindsight, if I am ever to be in that position, now I know what I'm looking for as far as uh, thought lines that continue on that don't really go away. And that's where we need to key in and just say, let's talk about this some more because it
Yeah.
seems to be very important to you right now.
Well, and that's the thing that's the really unfortunate part of what's going on politically right now, is this rejection of conversations of identity and gender and things like that. And I'm sure what it's doing is it's scaring a lot of parents away from just having the conversation. Your child might have those thoughts, but they might just be fleeting thoughts. It might just be a thing that you like, that, like you said, on par with the what happens if I go to the hospital? Where do frogs go when they die? These just random things that pop into our head. It could be one of those, or it could be something serious. The only not serious, but something more deeply rooted in their identity that they would need eventually to explore. And it's important just to have those conversations, and get their perspective and see, is it something that is more pervasive, or was it just that passing thought?
Yeah, yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. The social political landscape is such chaos right now. That's the only way I can think to describe it, because now all of a sudden, because everything has become a political issue, now you are approaching the things you do inside your own home with such care, not necessarily because you are carrying the flag on one side of the metaphorical aisle or the other, but you are very aware of what that conversation might have implications for your child, for instance, because if they're talking about this to you, they're probably talking about it to their friends and to their teachers. And so what responsibility do you have to prepare them for a conversation that they don't realize all the little nuances and complexities that go into it. And what do you do to prepare them for conversation that they'll get made fun of at some point, because they will, that as they get older, they'll be hated for it. They'll be outwardly hated for it. I don't envy parents of any kind right now, because it's not just gender identity issues. It's a lot of issues, and I've there's no way that I think I could properly prepare a child to go into the world and have these kind of conversations and not have it just mess with their psyche.
Mm. Yeah, it's a tough time. And yeah, when so many people there's so many people bring up a big stink about it, and so few truly safe spaces where they can feel comfortable, talking about those sorts of things. It's very similar in a way to where it was when we were children, but then also it's a different.
Yeah.
Moving on from there, and getting back in more to your story. Once you realized that you were trans, what was the more difficult thing for you right at first? Accepting it and coming to terms with it within yourself, or coming out to others?
I think the harder part for me initially was coming to grips with that myself. So the quick and dirty backstory for me is, as you said in the introduction, I'm a classically trained theologian. So as I'm going through my gender identity, I am enrolled at one of the best Christian seminaries in the world. That's not the ideal place to be exploring any sort of gender identity issue or sexuality or anything else of the nature. I grew up in a very conservative social environment, in a very conservative church. So the conversations could not be safely had. And so what I found myself wrestling with most often was this idea of, am I subconsciously parroting the conversations and in some cases the condemnation that was thrown towards people like me back in the 90s and the early 2000s, or are these my true thoughts, my true feelings, the underlying issue right here? And that took a very long time to grapple with, because not only is it something that I had to deal with on my own emotional level, but I also had to examine it from my position of faith and saying, how does this align with what I have been believing for the majority of my lifetime? And if I choose to take this stance now, how does that change where I go in the future? Because we'll just call a spade a spade. Existing in the American church, especially in a more conservative denomination, it would be far easier to just hide it and let that be your cross to bear, so to speak. Um, but at the end of the day, is it worth a lifetime of trouble and of struggle and of mental hardship and heartache and quite possibly broken relationships, because I don't have the capacity, nor do I feel like I have the freedom to be who I actually am, in favor of putting on a show because it's easier for the sake of the people that I'm around. Once we kind of wrestled through that and came to a realization of like, nope, this isn't going away. This is actually who I am. The coming out process was difficult, to be sure, but it felt more like a relief than an uphill battle. It was finally time to introduce my friends and my family to the me that I have always wanted to be along the way. And of course, that comes with its fair share of difficulties. Some people are going to be on board with it, some people are not. Some people are going to have questions, and some people are just going to be like, okay, cool, you do you. And you never know what you're going to get until you are in the moment, in the conversation with those people, and all of a sudden it becomes real for them, because it's not a theoretical issue anymore. It's not a political talking point. It's now, oh no, somebody who I am very close to is now a part of this community. How do I react to this? How do I treat them from here on out? And it's been a learning process, not only for me, but for really everyone around me.
Mhm. You bring up an interesting point in that triggered something for me. You're talking about how staying in the closet and just performing that role is easier. They're based on the consequences, a lot of unknowns, a lot of consequences that we are pretty darn sure are going to happen, those sort of things, it is easier to stay closeted and keep, you know, living this, playing this role and living this certain life. But I think the thing about being trans is, you know, using that egg cracking allegory that we do. Once the egg is cracked, you can. It just gets harder and harder with each thing that you do to stay in that shell and to stay in that lie essentially and performing that role, because the egg cracks further and further, and you become more and more self-aware of that need to be out and be yourself, and it gets harder and harder to perform that role and to pretend now to be this person. You know, I don't know about, I won't speak for you. For me, my gender identity just felt disingenuous. I felt like I didn't belong. I didn't understand why. I didn't, you know, I didn't understand why. I couldn't figure out how other people were. Like, why are you that way? Why do you say those things? Like, those are not the things that pop into my head. I just assumed that there was something wrong with me. Once I realized that no, this is, you know, I'm transgender. That's what's happening. Um, it just gets extremely difficult to fake it anymore.
Yeah. Once you kind of take that step and it's no longer performative, so to speak, or rather the performative nature of it becomes exhausting, as you say, that's where you start to realize, oh boy, this is about to get so much bigger and so much more difficult than I may be ready for. But here we are. So less about dwelling on the past and the what ifs and more about, okay, where do we go from here and how do we start to reconcile these feelings and the side of myself that has long been uh, not dormant, that's the wrong word, but really just hidden by choice. And how do we welcome it into the open? And are we prepared for all the difficulties that are going to come along with it? Because there are plenty.
And that's a perfect segue into the next segment. How did you bring it to light? You said you were in seminary school at the time.
Yep. So that is a hell of a story. So when I was exploring my gender identity in a more broad sense, before I had come to the realization and just said, yes, I'm trans, you know, throwing around all the different titles and labels to see what felt right, see what fit. So, cross-dresser, gender fluid, messed around with all the things. And I even said to certain people that I came out to after this point in the story, I was so nervous about adopting that trans identity when I came out to them the first time, like, oh, I'm just a cross-dresser. Don't worry, I'm not trans. Like that's the mental thought process that came along with it. But early on in this exploration of mine, I was working at a place called Top Golf. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's essentially a bowling alley for golf. A lot of beer and hamburgers and people that suck at golf. But I worked there for a while. It was a lot of fun. But lo and behold, somebody there, and I still don't know who it was to this day. I have my hunches, but somebody stumbled upon a few pictures of mine. I don't know if they found my Instagram profile or what had happened, but I got a text from my best friend who was a classmate with me in seminary, and he was also a manager at this Top Golf with me, and he just wrote one word, and it said, "Hey." And my immediate thought is something's wrong because you never just say the word hey to me. And so as the conversation progressed, he said, look, you need to know that there are rumors about you and pictures of you circulating in the venue. It may be time for you to get ahead of this conversation. And we're 72 hours of my life because the control had been ripped away from me. I was seemingly no longer in control of my own story. And that was a very heartbreaking, helpless feeling. And that essentially meant, okay, I guess I need to put everything in fast forward here because knowing the kind of people that work underneath me who are likely circulating this, they may think it's some funny joke and they're going to go throw it around on Facebook and Twitter and, oh, look at my manager. Isn't this so funny? And it could be earth shattering for people that aren't ready to see it or hear about it. So that all of a sudden started this snowball effect of, all right, I guess I I gotta call my siblings. I need to tell them. I need to tell my parents. I need to tell all of my closest friends. I need to tell all of these people so that they don't feel I've been hiding something from them and they don't hear it through the grapevine because I want them to hear it from me more than anything else. Apart from that 72-hour period, it became far easier to have those conversations because they were no longer laced with this idea of, oh, this is a painful, traumatic thing that I need to get out. The worst of that is already behind me. I approached it from then on of odds are you've heard something about this. Now you get to hear it from me instead. And you get to hear my side of the story. And it just became easier as time went on. And that's a very nice thing because I know for a lot of people, the act of coming out is difficult and you approach it with the worst case scenario in mind. What is this person going to say? Am I about to lose my relationship with this person? Are they going to spread rumors about me? Whatever. Your mind is your own worst enemy in that conversation, or at least in that thought process. And I was very pleasantly surprised by how many people I truly had on my side, including the ones that said, I know nothing about this. I'm going to need you to teach me, or do you know of somewhere I can go read up on things and like not have to bombard you with 100 questions, and then I can come back to you and we can talk about it a little bit more. And I would love to say it was perfect across the board. That's certainly not true because I've had my fair share of negative reactions and people who no longer want to be in my life, and that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Um, but all things considered, it's not a way that I would ever truly recommend that people start to come out, but in some weird way, it's what I needed because were it not for my hand being forced, I think it would have been a much slower process and one that would have been so much harder for me to go through in the long term rather than just ripping the band-aid off and saying, okay, these 3 days, these are going to suck. But after that, it's going to be a lot better.
Yeah, well, thank you for going into that. That answered my follow-up question perfectly. Of yeah, that how disappointing it is to have that control over your story taken away from you, just ripped from you that quickly. But that the way it pushed you forward, the way it pushed you to come out, and in a lot of ways, I'm sure address things that you were still kind of pushing off.
Yeah, and that's really what it is. As I said earlier, you can't really dwell on the past because you can't do anything about the past. You can think about how you would have done things differently, but that's ultimately not a fruitful internal monologue to have. You just got to focus on this is what happened. What lessons can I take from it now and apply it to better things further on down the road? And I like to think that that's how I have carried myself ever since that day, and just recognizing that for some people it's a lengthier conversation and it's going to be harder for them, and so I'm going to be patient with them. And then for some people it's a text message, it's a Snapchat, and hey, you may have already known this, but here I am, this is my name, these are my pronouns, so on and so forth, conversation over. But I still look back on it and say, yeah, it kind of had to happen that way. I was not in an emotional state or a mental state to throw myself off the cliff. So, yeah, as much of an awful thing as it was to do to another person, I still keep that silver lining of thankfulness of somebody else pushed me off the cliff. Thankfully, I was able to land safely.
Mhm. Well, and the other thing I do appreciate about your story is the fact that you had that colleague that saw things spreading and gave you the heads up. And you didn't have the opportunity to control the story the way you would have liked to, and come out in the way you wanted. But I do appreciate that person's foresight, and them coming to you and giving you at least that opportunity at that point to control the message as the most that you could.
Yeah, and I'm eternally grateful for him. He and his wife were the first people that I came out to in person, at least. And so in some way, I was also burdening them with this knowledge and asking them to never spread it around. But again, trying to look at the silver lining of things, Now that they know, not only do certain things make more sense to them, but also they are willing to have my back in that moment. And when they were asked about it, it wasn't, "Oh yeah, let me tell you everything I know." It's, "No, don't ask me about this. This is not my responsibility, and I'm not going to speak for my friend. You need to go talk to my friend yourself. And if you're not willing to do that, if you don't have the courage to go up and talk to them yourself, then you're probably more interested in the rumor than actually caring for them as a human being."
Mhm.
So, incredible that I had such a good friend and such a good ally in that moment. That comes around so rarely, and you got to hold on to people like those.
That's such a good point too, in considering when you're coming out and you're trying to accept yourself, and now you're outed, maybe you're out in public and people are seeing you and they're approaching you and asking you questions. Keep in mind whether or not they're genuine, and read whether they're genuinely interested in you, or whether it's a gossip thing, whether they're, they're interested in the oddity and the curiosity of it. And just give yourself that space to you know tell them to piss off. It's basically move on.
Exactly. I like to think that I have enough emotional intelligence that I can judge intent most of the time. And then there were times that it's just like, okay, you clearly don't care about me as a person. You just want the inside scoop. You want the story because you're going to go and like spread rumors again. So, no, kindly F off. I'm done having this conversation.
Was there anybody in this process of coming out that supported you and appreciated you in a way that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, absolutely. I can think of two individuals in particular. One was my friend Laura. And so when all of this was going down, she was one of the people that I came out to during this 3-day hell cycle. And people had prepared me for talking to Laura and just said, you know what, she may have some struggles coming to terms with this, and that's okay. She's going to come around. She loves you. You are her friends, but just be more patient with her. And as I was essentially unloading everything onto her, she was like, "Cool." It's like, I expected something a little bit more difficult than this. She said, "No, like, oh, what's your name? Like, how do you want me to refer to you? Do you have a favorite outfit? Ooh, do you want to go to this place? Do you want to?" And I was taken aback. Like, I actually had no words for her in that moment. But my other is my friend named Patrick. And Patrick and I worked together at Top Golf for a few years, and he was one of my silent allies that I didn't know about. So when rumors were going around, he was coming to my defense, even though he didn't know the truth, because he would say, "Do you have any proof of that? Okay, if don't, shut up and stop spreading rumors." Well, it just so happened that one night in particular, I was out at a bar with a friend, and through a comedy of error circumstances, he ended up in that same bar. And I would never have known that if I wasn't in the restroom at one point and a girl that I had been dating and recently broke things off with walked in. And I was like, okay, that's incredibly awkward. Well, I have to tell somebody right now. I can't keep that to myself. And so I texted Patrick and he said, "Oh, well, you're at this bar right now, aren't you?" I'm like, and he said, "It's okay. Come over to this side of the bar." And he bought me a drink. And it was a wonderful conversation because he was, um, again, just such an incredible friend. No judgment went into the conversation. He's just like, "Look, I love you no matter who you are, no matter how you look. You're always going to be my friend. So let's go have a few drinks and you can tell me all the nasty stuff over however long it takes." And it's he's still to this day one of my most trusted friends and allies. And I didn't expect it. And you rarely expect it from men in particular, because in my experience, they have a more difficult time coming to grips with that. And so it was a very pleasant surprise that he reacted in the way that he did and that he is such a staunch supporter of me.
So I was reading something in chat. Mirth
Oh, you're good.
Frost. I am not sure what it is that you're saying. If you could just elaborate more, I am reading chat, and we'll get to that. If you have any questions for our guest or myself, we'll get to that after the break. What were some of the things that you struggled with, Sammy, in your gender journey? What were some of the big things?
Oh, goodness. I think in a small way, the idea that I could never go back, and that's a kind of a twofold statement. I can never go back to the way things were. I can never go back to pretending that I'm something that I'm not. But I could also never go back in time and grasp onto this realization any sooner than I did. I'm a firm believer that I had to come to this realization at that point in time because who knows? Maybe I was not emotionally mature enough to grasp it when I was a teenager. Actually, I'm quite certain that I was not. Um, I certainly wasn't theologically or philosophically sound enough to square that with what I believe and to be able to reconcile that to my faith. And most of my struggles really ended up winding down to that. Am I a lesser person in the eyes of my friends, my family, my church, in the eyes of God because of this? Or am I totally missing something here? And I still struggle with that in some capacity because when I look at the rhetoric and I engage in some of the rhetoric surrounding trans people in general, but specifically as they relate to the American church as a very broad term there, I recognize that we're still not there yet. And I even had a professor and several friends who are either old classmates or current pastors, and they all say the same thing. The church isn't quite ready for you yet. It will be at some point down the road, but right now, it's not there yet. So I had my heart set on entering into ministry right out of seminary, and irony of ironies that I would come to the biggest realization of myself in my life during that period, and it would drastically alter not how I view the church necessarily, but how the church views me, and what kind of places would want to take me on as a minister of the gospel. And so that's the ongoing conversation with me at this point is maybe I entered seminary with this idea of this is where my future is going to take me, but maybe in actuality it was I need to learn these things for myself as a necessary step of my gender identity journey, and whatever happens after that if it relates to me entering the ministry is gravy. And if that's the case, then I'm okay with it. But tremendous struggle along the way, and as I said, uh, it still exists as intrusive thoughts for me on a fairly regular basis, and just thinking, man, what if? What if things were different? You know, you can't help but think on it. Just trying not to dwell on it.
So, what has this gender journey, this exploration of gender, meant for you on a deep level, sort of, an ethereal level? What does all of this mean, and what has it done for you?
It has meant that I finally feel a little bit more at home with myself. As I think you will probably hear a lot of trans people say, even if you can't put the words into it, if you can't articulate the exact thing that you mean, you always have some sense of something's off, something's not right. And I don't know exactly what that thing is, but ever since really admitting this identity and getting into therapy and living my life in this manner, yeah, things are arguably more difficult in the public space, but they are much easier for me in my personal life and in my social life to some extent. Like, yeah, I'm always looking over my shoulder when I'm in public because I live in a place that's not terribly accepting of trans people or just queer people in general. Um, but at least for me, it's no longer a thing like, do I really have to go out in public? Like, I just don't want to be seen. I don't want to be around people. Now I'm excited to do so because I am out in the world as the version of myself that I've always wanted the world to see, even if it's not that picture perfect version of myself that maybe you see on Instagram sometimes, or this unreachable idea of perfection that I have in my head. It's still, nope, even on days where I don't feel the best about myself, it is infinitely better than the days where I felt that I was hiding part of who I am.
Mhm. And as far as your gender journey to your journey of exploration and getting to that place of comfort with yourself and to where you want to be in your exploration, how far along are you in your process?
Oh, that great question. Kind of the cop out answer here, I suppose, is I don't know. But in truth, you never really know when you're going to reach that point where you say, I'm good. Like I'm at that place where I want to be. A lot of them are theoretical ideas for me to say, oh, well, I don't mean to phrase it this way. It sounds reductionist, but it's also easy to communicate this way. Um, I will be happy when I achieve X, when I look a certain way, when I'm on a certain dosage of hormones, when I've had this surgery. Like, none of that really means a ton to me because you just never know at what point you're going to say, I'm good. Like, I'm happy with who I am. I think for me, it's a much more intangible idea of I will know when I'm done in massive air quotes. I'll know when I'm happy because a lot of the fears and the hesitations that I have are just things of the past. And if let me put it this way, if I am much more focused on the normal troubles and struggles of life, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to make my car payment? Rather than, oh my gosh, what's going on with my gender identity? At that point, I'm probably at the place where I'm ready to say, yeah, you're good. Like, I think you've reached that point of acceptance with yourself.
As you've moved along your journey, have your goals shifted? Were there things that you set out? Did sort of set out a plan for what your journey would be? Surgeries, that sort of thing. And has that changed as you've gone along? You know,
I I'm a I'm a living example that you can set out all the plans in the world, and things that are out of your control will eventually wreck all of them. And so, a lot of that happened during the calendar year of 2023 because I unfortunately lost my job. And when you lose your job, you lose your health insurance. Then all of a sudden, oh, you can't afford all the medical transition, everything that comes along with it. So, plans are what they are. But as far as me just thinking about the future and my goals and everything, I think it's less of the physical presence of, what do I want my body to become, and it's more about what impact do I want to leave on the world, even if the physical changes happen more slowly than I am comfortable with or I'm anticipating. And as you said in the introduction, part of what I feel called to do is be an arbiter of peace in a conversation that is largely chaotic. So where there is a lot of rhetoric that is based on finger pointing and targeting other individuals and name calling instead of coming together somewhere in the middle to have what is essentially an adult conversation, that's where I step in. And I feel called to do that in every social space that I'm in, but in particular as it relates to the relationship between the American church and the LGBTQ community. I feel like that's eventually where I am going to thrive, and it's one of those goals that's kind of out there in the ether right now because a lot of things have to change in the social landscape, or somebody out there needs to be willing to take a risk on someone like me and say, nope, we care about you as an individual and we see the value that you can bring to our organization, and we care about that more than the potential public reaction of bringing on a transgender pastor, minister, associate, whatever the title may be.
what do you do to care for yourself these days? What are some of your self care routines when you're feeling, kind of down? You get dysphoric here and there, and what are those things that you do to make you feel confident in your identity again?
Uh, some days it's just rest, and that's 100% what it has to be. I'm a social butterfly. I like being out. I like being involved in people's lives. And even for the most extroverted extrovert, you need some time to recharge. And so there are days where I have to turn off my phone and turn off my computer, and I need to sit on my couch and read a book. I need to go sit on my hammock and be in nature. I need to take a bubble bath with a glass of wine. I need to do things that are good for my body and for my soul. Um, because I spend so much of my time, my energy, my capacity in the outward application of it all, and being involved in people's lives and wanting to keep up and wanting to instill change. So little things like that. And then, I have my hobbies along the way that I pour my time and my effort into. because they make me feel good about myself, even if they're not the best thing that I could ever create, and even if there's something that they don't end up taking off and making me an internet superstar. I'm still proud of what I'm able to create in that space. And, uh, content creation on Instagram and YouTube and Twitch and things like that. That's part of my self care because I enjoy doing it regardless of what the results are, so to speak.
Sort of touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to ask this one anyways to see if there's anything else that you want to add to it. Is there anything you feel like you've been able to accomplish along your journey because of the fact that you're transgender?
Yeah, just in a guerrilla marketing sense, being able to advocate for trans people in spaces where they often do not have a voice. And I keep on coming back to being in the church. And sometimes that actually happens within the four walls of a local church. And sometimes it's I see people that I went to seminary with or I grew up in church with, and they're going to post something on their social media that has some negative trans or negative queer rhetoric. And I don't make a public show of it. It's just I send them a private message and say, hey, I feel like this was not a terribly helpful thing to be posting. I feel like it paints a certain group of people in a negative light. And I feel like on some level you might be misinformed. I've done a lot of research on this. Can we have a conversation about it so that maybe um, you don't have what might be an incredibly negative impact on an individual who might be seeking to find a home within your relationship to them, within your church, whatever the case may be is. So it's one of those spaces where I feel uniquely equipped to be able to speak into the conversation, and because of that, it's opened some doors for me to have conversations with pastors about uh, trans people or queer people in general having a seat at the table and being represented in evangelical and in faith-based spaces, and the value that we as a community can bring uh, to those conversations.
It's wonderful to have someone like you there on that front. That's great. I love that. I love what you're doing there. What would you say is your favorite thing that you've learned through your journey about either yourself or the world around you?
Ah, I wouldn't necessarily say that I learned anything outrageous and new about the world around me because it's pretty much lined up with what I expected it to be. Just kind of a grab bag, it some people are gonna love you, some people are gonna hate you. But that's not new regardless of what interest you may have, what political party you align with, what sports team you might root for, you know? Uh, yeah, I'm a Tampa Bay Lightning fan, so I'm not going to make a lot of friends in Boston in general, and it has nothing to do with who I am as a person, it has everything to do with the teams that we root for. From that perspective, nothing really changed about the world, more just a sense of understanding of how I approach it. I think what changed for me internally um, was a newfound confidence that I never had before. Of, I said earlier that I'm a big time extrovert, and that's always been true. I've always related to people easily. I've always gotten people's trust very easily. And I think for most of my life, that was a sort of survival mechanism of I need to be loved, I need to be accepted, and this is the easiest way for me to do it. And now all of a sudden, my approach to the world is if that happens, that's great. But my confidence and my sense of self is no longer wrapped up in what other people think of me. Of course, that's a nuanced statement to make because I will always care what my parents and my siblings and my closest friends think about me, what they have to say about me. And when they speak into my life, I will always take it seriously. But as more just a broad stroke statement, uh, your random internet commenter doesn't bother me anymore. Person on the street who throws some nasty words my way, I don't care. I never have to see them again because I'm not bound to this idea of that person's perception of me as reality. They couldn't care less about me. They make an assumption based on what they think they know about the world and they lump me into a box. They will never know me as deeply and as innately as I will. So making that shift from identity being found in what somebody else thinks of me versus what I think of me and what I know to be true about myself changed my entire world.
What advice do you have after this experience to pass on to young and closeted trans folks out there?
I would say you owe it to yourself to be the version of yourself that you are the most happy with. With that said, just know that it's gonna come with some form of difficulty. You just don't know what that difficulty is. But it is far easier for you to go through life being satisfied and happy and confident with who you are as a person and finding your way and navigating your way through life that way versus putting on a show for everybody else and living up to some arbitrary expectation based on what others have said to you throughout the course of your life. And with that, I throw in this other little comment. People pay far less attention to you than you think that they do. So if you are striving to be noticed by somebody else, whether that is a super close friend or just somebody you come across on the street, just recognizing they have their own stuff going on. So you don't need to put all your focus into conforming to what you think they want you to be. Just be the version of yourself that makes you the happiest. The right people will, if they are already in your life, they will continue to be in your life. And if they're not there already, they will be further on down the road.
Well, Sami Flair, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all your perspective and your wonderful story.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a wonderful experience.
All right, y'all, that is our edit for the episode. Oh, my hair's falling down on me. That does it for the main bit of the episode. We're going to take our break and we're going to come back. Don't go anywhere. There is still more show. This is the fun part. I'm going to go get a glass of wine. We're going to relax a little bit and talk more with Sami, but this time more about other things outside of being trans and just the general experience. We'll dive deep into stuff about religion and you mentioned some hobbies. Of course, there's a sports discussion to be had. So please keep your questions and comments coming in. Anything that you'd like to know in this. Let's have a fun time. We'll be back in a few minutes. To young or closeted trans people out there.
And this is probably cliche to death, but I have to say that you have to do what's right for you at a time that's right for you. No one else can make that decision for you. And no one else can push you into something that you're not ready for. You can't live your life to make everyone else happy all the time. Because if you try and do that, you're going to fail. You're never going to make everyone happy.
I think getting a support network and at least telling a few close friends is huge. It's so huge. Because those feelings of being alone and not being seen be really devastating. Having the support of a couple of really close friends or family members or whoever you trust is just absolutely huge.
Just find anybody to talk to that you can about this. If you feel like you're trans or you might be trans, or just find somebody you can confide in.
Having a group of friends, no matter how small, or somebody that can back you up and lift you up during it will mean the world. Because at first, everybody is scared. The more you go out, the more you build your confidence in yourself, the less it'll affect you. Everybody feels it and will continue to feel it. And it's just whether or not you let it overtake you and control you, or you let it go past.
Almost every relationship has grown deeper as a result of sharing this deeper part of myself. So I think there's something to finding your community to get to expand with and reinforce, but I think it then amplifies into almost every other relationship you can have.
I think that there's a struggle to transition the right way. Everyone's going to transition on a different timeline, in different order of operations, and as long as it happens how they want it to happen, that's a valid transition. And not transition is valid.
I do struggle with this. I should follow my own advice. Don't focus on like regretting things, like not ever like not starting early enough or anything like that, because then you'll just go through a loop and just constantly think about it, and it's not something you can change.
I didn't take anything for granted. Every positive change, even most of the time, I swear it was just a placebo where I noticed some growth in places that I wanted growth, or I would notice like really subtle things. I swear every single day for that first year. And those are I looked at the victories more than I looked at anything else. And I think that's super important during the first year.
So much of transitioning is was just waiting on something. You know, waiting for things to happen in your body, waiting for things to happen in your brain, waiting for surgeries, waiting for name changes. Be patient, because what's waiting for you at the end is so worth everything that you felt, all the hurt that you felt, all the anguish that you felt, all the anxiety. It just makes everything so much better. I can't describe the feeling of waking up and getting to be me, this person that I've wanted to be my entire life, this person that I've known I was my entire life. It just makes everything so worth it.
I would go back and say, look, you're going to go through a lot of crap and it's going to be hard, but it's going to make you a better person to go through it, and you'll be fine. Just know you'll be fine. Like, that's the main point they want to make.
You have to be you. You can't hide who you are. You have to be you. And I know that it's going to be scary and you're going to get bullied a lot. So be you, but do it in a safe way. Like, don't ever put yourself in danger. But also, don't cower down because it's going to be hard. Because life is hard.
It is scary, but hopefully it's worth it. And most of the time it is worth it to truly be you, whatever form that looks like. You know, I've always been happy, but I didn't know, and I didn't know peace and joy the way that I know it now. And it was a bit of a struggle at first, but I would do it a million times over. And one of the things that I say often in my lives is, do it scared. Yeah, it's scary. Then do it scared.
Whatever you choose to do.
Oh, sorry, Bree. We're gonna jump back in here. I hit too many buttons. Sorry, I got my wine and it's hit me a little sharp in the back of the throat. Clearly, I need more. All right, y'all. Welcome back. Welcome back to the show, Sammy.
Hello.
And I've got wine. You have whiskey, I believe.
I do. This was my Christmas gift from one of my brothers. It is Glenlivet 14, and I am in love with it.
Nice. How did you get into that line of drinks?
You know, the funny thing is that I actually, apart from my 21st birthday, I really didn't drink any alcohol up until I was like 27. And at that point, I thought all I like is beer. That's easy. And then once I started to work at Topgolf specifically, but especially once I started working in our events department and I was in charge of liquor, and then I became a bar manager, that's where you start all the exploration, finding out what you do like, and more importantly, what you do not like.
Yeah, gin. Oh.
Not a gin fan. See, that's tequila for me.
Oh, you don't like tequila?
Tequila, okay, good tequila, yes. Sipping tequila, or if it's a cocktail that is mixed well, wonderful. But most people that I go out and drink with don't want to do that. They want to take shots of tequila, and when you take shots of tequila, you take shots of bad tequila. So, my love-hate relationship and my stomach reaction whenever I hear somebody say, "Do you want to take shots of tequila?" It's all based on those bad experiences.
Exactly. I was really happy because I had, I think I came across sake first, and had a little bit of an appreciation. Not very much. I was still fairly new in drinking, but when I was out somewhere and they were doing sake bombs, you drop the sake in a beer,
yeah.
and I'm like, this beer seems pretty good. the sake seems really good. Like, why would you bomb it and chug it? So I dropped it in like everybody else did, and while they chugged, I kind of sipped it, and I'm like, this is just really good. And so,
Okay.
and so since then, I love to do that. I love to get a nice hot sake and a Sapporo or an Asahi, and get a shot of the sake, and pour it in, and it just makes the beer. It just adds something. It makes it kind of creamy, and it's so good. 10 out of 10 would recommend.
That's a new one for me. I typically stay away from bomb shots of any kind because, at least in my experience, if you don't chug them, they go bad really quick, or they go south as far as taste.
Yes.
But one of my good friends, her name is Maddie. She lives nearby. I guess one of the biggest sake distillery. I don't think is the right word. Maybe it's brewery. But anyway, she loves sake. I will have to throw that recommendation her way and get her take on it.
Okay, yeah, I would love to hear back on that. One of the things that we did that was a one of my massive regrets, and I did chug it, so I did it the right way. But we were out at a bachelor party one night, and we got to I think it was a British pub, and we did Irish car bombs. So a little blasphemy there. It was a little mixing the but hey, whatever. And it was hilarious because the guy, the bachelor, the guy next to me, took the beer, chugged it, put it down on the counter, and immediately turned and went to the bathroom to go throw up. Like it was instantaneous. Just like it hit him. Like, I'm done. I'm going to throw up. And my big regret is not following him. Like, that would have been the better idea, because I felt very rough the rest, like that night and the next day. Like, he made the smart decision.
Yeah, sometimes you need that immediate release, and it doesn't fix everything, but it changes it for the better.
Yeah. Oh, I was definitely the worst on that one. Tonight, for anybody who cares, which I don't know that there is, I'm drinking a Justin. Well, I should have known what it's. Let's see. It's got to be a Sauv Blanc, because it's very dry, but it's very good. I was gonna open
right up my alley.
I was gonna open my my cheap ass bottle of Woodbridge Red Cabernet. It's a Cabernet Sauvignon, but it's Woodbridge. It's cheap. It's the big bottle, and I'm like, this is too big of a bottle for just probably gonna need the one glass. So
That's what Trader Joe's is for. Delicious cheap wine.
So what should we talk about here? Okay, let's before we get to, I'm just not feeling serious anymore. Before we get into talking about religious and diving into religion and diving into all of the many aspects of that, let's start light and talk about sports. How did you get into sports? Why Tampa Bay of all places?
Well, I grew up in Tampa Bay, so there's the easy one out of the gate. But sports was a connection that I had with my dad and with my brothers in particular. I had different connections with my mom and with my sister, but sports was the thing. So when I was growing up, the only sports team that was in town was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they were awful for most of my childhood up until Tony Dungy came to town and they started winning and going to championships, and then they kicked him to the curb, brought in John Gruden, won a Super Bowl. But over that time, started to get more sports teams that were okay. So that's not fair. The Tampa Bay Lightning were around for most of my childhood, but the Buccaneers were always there. And so it just became a thing that I played sports growing up. I played football and baseball primarily. Played tennis as I got older. Play volleyball now. But watching sports as an interest and just something fun to do and a way to relate to other people, it's just been a part of my life for as long as I can possibly remember. Before the Tampa Bay Rays came to town, I had to find the closest baseball team that I liked, so I was an Atlanta Braves fan. And just, I slowly moved all of my interests back into the local Tampa Bay teams, but we never had a basketball team, so the closest I ever got was the Orlando Magic.
And was that were you able to catch the Shaq era or?
Oh yes, yep. I distinctly remember growing up. The Shaq era was also when the Chicago Bulls were huge, and so I was watching a ton of Michael Jordan because how could you not? He was the best player in the world. But locally, like, that's what you had. You had Shaq, and he meant the world to the state of Florida.
Oh yeah, what were you saying that I was gonna follow up on? I guess I love that. Yeah, you would find the next closest. And back in the day, the Braves were a good place to end up on because with Turner, there were a ton of Brave games on. You could almost always watch the Braves. So.
Yep. And we had the benefit of living close enough. Atlanta's not exactly close to the Tampa Bay area, but it's close enough that if you wanted to drive up to Atlanta and see a game, it'd be a long day, but you could do it. Or you could just stay overnight and maybe catch 2 games or a series or something like that. But I actually had this weird connection to Chipper Jones of all players because he, I believe, grew up somewhere around Pensacola, Florida, which is in the Panhandle. And I had extended family that lived out there. And once my aunt found out that I was a baseball fan and in particular a Braves fan, that was always the conversation. Oh, did you see what Chipper was doing? Oh, I talked to Chipper the other day, so on and so forth. And I think I got some signed memorabilia from him or something of that nature. But I gravitated towards him as a player, but so many of those players that went or that won the NL East 14 seasons in a row, like Andrew Jones and Javi Lopez, Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, all those players. Like it was just, it was phenomenal. And I loved it. At that point, I kind of wished I lived closer to Atlanta so I could see more games. But you know, we get the Rays in town, and you settle. You settle with a brand new team, an expansion team, where you kind of get the old leftovers. I remember seeing Wade Boggs come to town, Fred McGriff come to town, and wow, this is going to be a really good team. It never was, unfortunately. But as a first venture for the Tampa Bay area into baseball, it kind of worked, and you had a lot of fun experiences and a lot of cheap games that you can go to. And you know, for a kid that's how old was I when the Rays came to town? I think it was 11, 12, something like that. You didn't need to see good baseball. You didn't need to see championship baseball. You just wanted to go to the ballpark and you wanted to see the game. So
we have a team now. It's great.
Yeah, exactly. Except they aren't actually in Tampa Bay, so it's not as close as you think it is.
Oh,
yeah.
They did one of those
That's
cheater
a whole
things,
other
huh?
conversation.
So, Rich is one of our fans here.
Love it. Rich Dresden, right?
Username Dresden Media.
Yep, love that guy. He's great.
He's great.
Talented artist.
Yes. He's loving seeing you here. Glad that he made it to the show tonight. Do you have any particular questions for Sami tonight, Rich?
Oh yeah, hit me, Rich. I'm all ears, metaphorically speaking, through the conduit here.
What have you? Excuse me.
Bless you.
Sorry.
All good.
What is it? What have you been focusing on in your streams?
Right now in my streams, it's more in the community building phase more than anything. As if you hadn't guessed, I can sit here, have a camera, and I can talk for a long time. But if you don't relate well to anyone, then I don't know. I feel a bit narcissistic about that. Let me talk about me for the next 3 hours and nothing else. So honestly, the games that I play are a bit secondary to the whole purpose behind streaming, which is to, in a digital sense, get my friends in the same room to watch me be bad at playing video games. And it kind of branched out from there to doing other little fun one-off things. Like I did a cooking stream at some point last month. So people were getting an inside look at my kitchen and my process for 3 to 4 hours, and it was a lot of fun. We did a a watch along stream for just some of the worst Easter plays you've ever seen in your life. And that was fun as well. But what's the most rewarding thing to me is not, oh, I need to hit affiliate and then I need to hit partner and then I need to have all these. No, do you have a good community around you? Do they enjoy what you are putting out? And do you feel involved in their lives? Do you feel that they are involved in yours? That's what I gravitate towards all the time. And it's been so much fun. I have a lot of different things that I want to try out this year, and we'll throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. But I've had so much fun being back on stream.
I am muted, as I said that I tend to do often. Yeah, I got to finally do another stream yesterday. I did I don't know, y'all, how long did I stream for? I came on at 10 a.m. and I signed off at like about 4:30. So it was a good long one.
Oh.
And I'm just amazed at how easy that is to do often. There were like 3 things that I'd planned to get to that I didn't even do yesterday. But I think we had a pretty good time. I love doing those for Christmas and Thanksgiving, and I was on Christmas Day for a little bit, but then I had some obligations. But I love the idea of being on as a member of the trans community to give trans folks who have problematic family relationships and no place to be, a spot to be and hang out with. So, all right, I'm getting some. It was a good stream yesterday.
In some way, you also get to be a signpost, a benchmark for people. And the example I always bring up is, how do you respond to criticism in the moment when somebody comes in clearly just to troll you and to insult you and everything? And I know a lot of people that don't know how to respond to that well. And so if you have the opportunity to do it and you have thick enough skin, you gave somebody else the ammunition they need to handle themselves. Maybe not on stream, but in their own version of that, where they're up against a difficult conversation or a troll or something like that.
I found that a lot in TikTok, and you remind me, that's something I really need to get back into doing this year, is more of those TikTok lives, because that's where I found that. We've gotten to the point in our Twitch community where, it's mostly just friends and family that are coming in and watching, and Rich says trolls got nothing on Emily. But I did get, I did 1 or 2 just sort of out of the blue just to try it out. And I did get some immediate, really good feedback on how I responded to trolls, how I responded to people trying to say incendiary things and kind of talking through it, being level-headed, going, okay, sort of like what you were saying before of like, okay, here's this thing that you said that is clearly rhetoric, is just a copycat of something that somebody else said, and you're repeating it because you think it's the cool thing or whatever. And here's why that's incorrect, and here's more of what the truth is, and here's my perspective on it. Instead of just responding like, oh, you're just being an asshole, F off. And then that reminds me, I had this, I think it was on the 2nd or 3rd live that I did, where I had some teenager come on and question me very deeply about pronouns, but pronouns like they them is wrong because they them is plural, and it's like, okay, so there's a lot of historical evidence, of historical references of they them as as whatever, and think about it. If you're looking at security camera footage and it's grainy and you can't see what who the person is, if they're a guy or a girl, you would say you're looking at this camera footage, you're describing it to the police. You would say, they're getting into the cash register now, they're going over here. So like, you use they and them to describe people a lot more often than you'd think. And after that analogy, the kid said F you like 3 times and then laughed. It's just like, well, what are you doing? Like, you make a statement or you ask a question, and I give you several good examples, several good real world examples that that you would use, and then the end is like is just a swear at me. It's like, okay, come on.
That's usually where I end up starting conversations like those. Like, if that's a comment that comes my way, I'm like, are you here to argue the grammar of this, the philosophy or the ontology of this, or are you here to just say something and then leave? Because based on that answer, that's how I will respond.
Yeah.
Made my life so much easier in judging intent and what people are actually here for.
Yeah, I'm bummed. Somebody reached out to me who was trying to come up on the live, and we didn't get to them. But they were a pastor, and they had several questions for me, and they wanted to have a conversation. They appreciated the way that I approached my conversations, and I said, yeah, let's do it. And we were just sort of never able to connect. So I'll have to maybe see if I can do that, because I love the religious discussions, and I can't wait to get into that with you. Rich says real quick, facts. They, them, singular has always been around, even if the language isn't.
Yeah, and just talking about the English language in particular, because obviously that's the one we speak, and that's where all of this happens. But other world languages, they're so tricky and they're so much more nuanced than ours is. And once you start dealing with other languages, you realize how not an issue it actually is. It's wild to me. But as is the case with everything, it becomes a political issue, it's a social issue, and then the rhetoric is just destroyed at that point. It's
Yeah.
unfortunate, but just it's the cycle.
Yeah. Well, and so much of the rhetoric just uses no logic or common sense even. Like it's so anti-logical and anti-awareness. Like that. I mean, that's what we're seeing right now. This whole anti-woke movement is like, no, we don't want to understand things. We don't want to learn things. We want to stick to our limited, incorrect view of things and bury our heads in the sand at that point. It's like,
We like tradition more than change. And when you realize that tradition is just peer pressure from dead people, you start to actually wonder if it's necessary or not.
on the words thing, something that I don't know if you've come across this, you've experienced this. It blew my mind. It disappointed me greatly, but also blew my mind to hear from dictionary people who contribute and write and publish the dictionary, Webster, those sorts of things, to learn that this thing that I thought was, and forgive the poor pun or analogy, the dictionary was the Bible of words in the English language.
Yep.
And like I said, I was shocked, dismayed, and had my world just absolutely blown apart to hear that the dictionary is merely a reflection of the words and how they're used commonly in everyday usage. The dictionary isn't a record of the correct usage of words. It is a reflection of how words are used, and that's why it changes. And like I said, that was very disappointing, blew my mind. And because
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I like that. I need to chew on it for a little bit, but that does kind of throw it on its head from everything I've ever known.
Yeah, and I was trying to be sort of, grammar and word Nazi about certain things, and I was very, very against what's my word? Oh my God, why am I blanking on this right now? Everybody says it, and it drives me fucking crazy. Irregardless. Because you're putting together irrespective and regardless, and you're putting a double negative, and it's not a real thing, and blah blah blah. And seeing that make it into the dictionary, I'm like, no, we can't change it because that's an incorrect usage of the word. And then to find out that to plant my flag and say I'm going to die on this hill, and then to learn that the hill is made of sand and just changes constantly was devastating at first.
Mine, I have grown up enough to where I don't insert myself into the conversation anymore, but the one that I can never get out of my mind is the whole less versus fewer and more versus greater. And I hear it used incorrectly all the time, and I just have to shut my mouth. But man, based on what you've said, I wonder how that changes the landscape of of its usage and how it's listed in what many people consider to be like the correct uh, uh, the correct usage of it in a dictionary. This is fascinating. I need to think on this. I love it.
Well, yeah, that's how we get literally meaning figuratively as in a slang usage. And I would prefer if the dictionary had the definition of the words, and this is what the words mean, and then a subcategory of here is the slang usage. This is how it's being used currently. I would like that rooting in what the what the word means, what the etymology is, like the prefix and the suffix and all that stuff, like what the word actually means, and then yes, you can include the slang and all of that, but.
So we need to find a middle ground between Webster's dictionary and Urban Dictionary. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes. Yeah, Urban Dictionary can change every week. I'm fine with that. Webster's for my brain needs to say more static. This is where I go burying my head in the sand. So
I'm with you on that.
Because as I told my girlfriend early in our relationship, and a thing that she still parrots back to me in a mocking way, words matter.
Yes, they do.
Rhetoric is made to be doused in logic and set ablaze, turned to ash and raised from the ash to love and compassion. Okay, well, I don't have any other things to kind of keep us from this now. Let's dive into what's going to be our most serious topic of the night.
Okay.
Religion, the religious experience as a trans person, reconciling those things, taking the things that you've been taught, and fixing that in conjunction with what you know to be true about yourself and the real world, your relationship with God. Where's the entry point into this? What were some of the things that you did in that moment, in those early moments, when you realized you were trans and that this was going to be a fight to be accepted within the church and within yourself, with your own understanding of the Bible? How did you approach that?
So the initial approach was twofold. The first bit of that was to do my own research in listening to the unpopular opinion. And basically what that means is I'm not saying we're jumping off the cliff of orthodoxy and getting into heresy. I mean, people who claim to believe the same things that I do, but have a drastically different opinion on queer theology, shall we say, than I do, and that most people that I had held as spiritual influencers and guides and authorities throughout most of my life. I needed to hear those other voices just to get a different perspective on it, because my perspective is immersed in 20 something years of exposure to primarily the same church body and the same set of voices along the way. And it quickly became an echo chamber. I generally dislike echo chambers. I don't think they're good for social interaction in general. So I had to do that. But the other side of it for me was I needed to go and talk to somebody who knew more than I did in person. And I did so with one of my professors, under the guise of, oh, I have this friend who is struggling with their gender identity and they have questions, but they came to me as a spiritual authority and I need to know what to tell them. And uh, it was a very liberating conversation because I realized that my professor and I actually saw eye to eye on a lot of things that we didn't realize, because it's not a conversation that came up very often in a classroom setting, even though this is the same professor that within my first year, he said, you know what? The biggest issue in the church when I was your age was matters of marriage and divorce. And that was all the conversation. It was all the arguments was focused on that right there. He said, what your generational conversation is going to be is gender and sexuality. And I was was like, okay, yep, I have already found that to be true, so I'm glad we're on the same page. But it was remarkable to me that this man who had gone through the exact same program I did 30 years prior, who an extremely intelligent man, and as many would view him to be a very conservative man, he was like, "Now I'm kind of on board." And his general viewpoint was, in spaces and in topics where you don't know the truth, not only do you owe it to yourself to open the conversation and explore things for yourself, but if you don't know the truth, you can respectfully disagree with somebody else and it's okay. And at that point, I was like, cool, all bets are off. We're diving into this. And I feel like I no longer have the shackles attached to me anymore. I feel like I can give this a good, honest effort without feeling some nagging sense of guilt for, I don't know, doing something that is prevalent in my mind most hours of the day.
Mhm. Yeah, and truly approach it with an open mind. And yeah, you've got your experience now that you, and this understanding that you've come to, and you can approach others with that and disagree with them, but do it in a way where you potentially both could learn something.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Once you kind of cast aside the ideas of the talking points that everybody is discussing right now, and we say, all right, on both sides, what are the things that we need to really throw some nuance and some complexity into the mix, that we need to come to a greater understanding, and we need to know what each other means when we say a specific word, apropos of your discussion on the dictionary. It's even worse when you're talking about somebody that says, oh, well, this word clearly means this over here, and you think it means this over here. Oftentimes, the truth is somewhere closer to the middle of all that. So once you can actually lay the groundwork for those things, that's where productive conversation starts to happen. But you got to get people away from their tribalistic mindset and get them out of their camp and willing to say, I might be wrong about this. And if I am, let's talk about it. What do you have to say about this, that, and the other? And where might you be wrong? And where will you concede some ground? Until that happens, a productive conversation typically does not exist.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting conundrum to be in, especially I feel it's sort of most prevalent in America, though we see it just throughout the world. This fight between the tribalism of religion, well, all religion, honestly, but we're seeing a lot of it here of Christianity, but a certain brand of Christianity.
Yes.
And, contrast that with the fact that Christianity, following Christ's main message was accept and love everybody, accept your brother, do what you can in service of others. And it's so strange to have that contradiction in Christianity of like, no, it's deep rooted tribalism, it's deep rooted conservatism, and a set of beliefs that are unchanging, unwavering, and unaccepting of others. How have you made peace with any of that and kind of wrestled with it?
That's a very deep question.
I avoided it as long as I could. We could talk more sports, but at some point we got to get into this.
I get it. At a certain point, every denomination within Christianity has to admit what ground they're willing to concede and what they're not. And to put a colloquial term on it, we're talking about closed fist theology. These are things that we know to be unchanging. This is orthodoxy. This is doctrine. We do not move on this.
Webster Dictionary.
Open hand theology. Yes, exactly. Versus open hand theology. Here is an issue. It may not necessarily be a social issue. It may not necessarily be a spiritual issue, but it's something that is in constant conversation in circles within the community of faith. And we are not so sure that our position is the quote unquote correct position, but but it's the position that we hold for the time being. This over here is far better. I won't say better. This over here is far more open to having those conversations than closed fist theology. And what I have found to be the most productive thing for me is understanding where people of any denomination fall on that spectrum. So we're going to talk about transgender issues. Great. Which issue are we going to talk about? And is it a matter of doctrine, or is it a matter of Christian liberty for you? Are we talking about gender identity issues in general? Are we talking about transition? And if so, what part of transition? Is it medical? Is it social? Is it the the legal process of it all? Are we not talking about any of that? We're just talking about an idea, theoretical topic of the brokenness of humanity and how it leads to trans identities in general. Once we can nail down all of that, then we can start to have a better conversation about it. The problem that I have run into is that many people that I come across don't actually know what conversation they want to have. And some of that is based in tradition. As I said, some of it is talking points from the pulpit and from politicians and from spiritual leaders, so on and so forth. But you can't have a conversation with somebody that doesn't know what conversation they want to have, because they will constantly jump around on the topics. And it's the same idea of being in education and pursuing a higher degree. As I'm pursuing a doctorate, many of the professors that would be willing to oversee me constantly say, you need to narrow down your topic. You need to narrow it down so much further than you think you possibly do. You need to be laser focused and super precise on what specifically you want to talk about. Otherwise, you're going to get lost in the weeds along the way. And I won't say the tricky thing, because it's not necessarily that, but one of the inherent issues that come along with talking about transgender people in the church is there's not one singular issue. It's a myriad of issues depending on how deep you want to get into it. And it's also exhausting to have that many points of a conversation, all for the sake of somebody that maybe is not actually willing to change their mind. They just want to stand their ground. They want to defend their point already. So,
well, yeah,
there's so many difficulties come with it.
Yeah, and it that goes back to like the TikTok live experience, and these people that come in and are just there to be contradictory to a trans person. And I hadn't even thought about that perspective of like, they don't even know what they want the discussion or argument to be. They just want to be contradictory to you as a concept.
Yeah. It's all based in this idea of what I know, and sometimes it's not even what I know, it's what I've heard, because it was passed down to me from this pastor, this speaker, this professor, this writer, this whatever. What I know to be true
Matt
is
Walsh,
true.
that asshole.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts on Matt Walsh. But what I know to be true based on those sources is immovable for me. And I'm essentially going to parrot what I have learned from them. And that's as far as I want the conversation to go. And that's fine. If you want to approach a conversation like that, I'll sit and I will listen and I will attempt to respond, but it's ultimately going to fall on deaf ears. Yeah. So this is my general point for most conversations that I have as an adult now, where it's far more complex than a binary yes or no. We need to understand what conversation we're actually having here before we can make any sort of progress.
Yeah, like I said, I think that's a good thing to keep in mind when approaching some of these conversations. And I feel like it would be pretty easy with that in mind to pick those out and go like, because I felt them. I felt that was the case, but without that clear understanding that this is just not going to go anywhere, because they don't even know what their argument is. They don't have a particular argument. They've heard something. They've formed a belief that is contrary to your existence, and they just want to stand that ground, but aggressively. They don't want to just stand that ground. They want to come at you and in your face stand their ground. Like they have to try and persuade you somehow that you are wrong and you're invalid and you should not be here.
And that is quite possibly the hardest part about having those conversations, because it essentially gets down to an ontological choice, or an ontological conversation versus an ethological conversation of what we say is existence, they say is choice. And when you disagree on that, you're going to disagree on basically everything else along the way. And it's unfortunate, but it's also what you tend to expect from. You can't have all knowledge all the time. You can't be an expert in absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And for your typical lay person in the church, I don't expect them to be an expert in any theological issue or any social issue as it pertains to the application of theology and scripture. So it shouldn't surprise me at all that they are starting on a point that is shaky as existence versus choice. And that's where it ultimately has to begin. And once we can cross that bridge, then maybe we're actually getting somewhere productive. But that it's tough. A lot of people that I respect and in some cases went to school with, they still frame the conversation in that manner. And I'm like, but do you realize what you're saying to me? Somebody who believes, as far as doctrine is concerned, the exact same thing as you. We agree. Okay. We understand what we're talking about here. And you have so drastically cast me, knowingly or unknowingly, in a light that is antithetical to what you believe. And that's just not true. That bothers me.
Mm-hmm. I had a very good point there. It was very poignant, and it was spot on. It was great. It was wonderful.
I believe you.
You were going to be very impressed, and I've lost it somehow. God damn, what was it? It was so good. As my brain is stumbling and tripping over itself, Mish Cosplay had dropped in and said,
Love Mish.
"Oh, hi, Sammy," and is throwing a lot of love your way. You know Mish?
Love Mish. Yes, I do. A friend, follower on Instagram and on Twitch. Good person.
Yes, we've known Mish for quite a while here on the Transverse, and yes, they're awesome. No, it's just so it's so interesting to think about that, and to, you know, I'm so disappointed that you've run into that so much in your area, that you know, so many closed fists, and I had to struggle against that. Let's again, since my brain's a little bit wonky now, maybe the wine was a bad idea. 1946 was an interesting year for Christianity. How much have you dove into that? And do you even, I mean, first off, do you know what I'm referencing?
I think so, but just to make sure we're on the same page, to what are you referencing?
There is actually a movie, and I can't wait to see it. It's 1946, The Mistranslation That Shifted a Culture. So this was when some people dove into the Bible, and they translated some things to say that the Bible now says that homosexuality is a sin, that homosexuals will not inherit the kingdom of God, you know, yada yada, and has seemed to be a major framework for the assault on gay, LGBT, trans rights since then. I have talked to a couple people who are religious scholars who have said that there are other things that are in the Bible that reference it and are negative towards the LGBT community. But what are your thoughts on what that moment in time in 1946 did for Christianity's view of us, and, you know, what have been some of your main ways of combating that?
It doesn't surprise me in hindsight, but I also recognize it as something that was inherently damaging, because anytime you start to throw around, and let's keep in mind that as we are talking about the Bible, we're talking about documents that are thousands of years old, that have been translated multiple times throughout history, from multiple languages. And ultimately, um, we lose some cultural understanding along the way, being as far removed from it as we are.
Well, and
Uh,
let me just break in really quick and add another thing to that layering, that a lot of the things that were written in the Bible, as far as my understanding, and I'm not even vaguely a scholar, so I should shut up soon, but a lot of the stories were written long after the people. Like please correct me on this. I heard recently that the earliest stories about Jesus Christ were written roughly 100 years after.
Yeah, it's in the ballpark of that. And they're not meant to be, or they were not, real-time dramas unfolding before the eyes of the authors, right? Because even the authors of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they are telling their own story for a specific audience, and it is tempered by their experience in that moment of being in relationship with the person Jesus Christ in the moment. And they didn't think, oh, I should probably run and write this down once it happened. It wasn't until after Jesus's death and ascension that it inspired them. Maybe I should record this. Maybe this is a story worth telling. So you're right about that, and that applies to the Old Testament as well. But limited human beings that we are, and looking for the easiest response, what's our immediate go-to? Oh, this is a story about Jesus, somebody who walked and talked and ate with Jesus. They must have been writing it down as it happened, and that's one of the key misunderstandings that happens. Um, as I was saying earlier, you're dealing with ancient languages. Nobody has spoken Koine Greek in hundreds, if not thousands of years. Nobody has spoken that version of Hebrew in hundreds, if not thousands of years. You're going to lose nuance along the way unless the translators are scholars. And some of them are, admittedly, and some of them are not. They're doing the best with what they have. And we have incredible technological resources at our fingertips that we can click on a word in the original manuscript and we can say, these are all the possible meanings of the word. And we can essentially select the one that we like the best and maybe fits our narrative the best. And that's what I feel happened in this conversation of the word homosexual being in the Bible, with the connotation that it carries in the argument that we are discussing, that will inevitably be discussed in that movie. And that is a conversation that unfortunately doesn't make it that far outside of seminary classrooms. You won't hear it preached from the pulpit very often. You won't hear it talked about in a Sunday school classroom very often. You might hear it talked about on a podcast or a YouTube video or something like that. But at the end of the day, people view spiritual authority as people in positions of power. If you're a pastor, I'm going to listen to you. Are you an established author or theologian? Great, I'm going to listen to you. Nobody's going to listen to me. And I understand that. The irony is that I actually know what I'm talking about. And some of these people that they're listening to don't, or they have these biases that they're already leaning into for the conversation. And the assumption that often gets made about me is, oh, you're clearly going to side with the woke idea that everything is allowed, so on and so forth. I'm like, you don't know that. You're not even having the conversation with me right now. So what are we actually talking about here? Yeah, I'm looking forward to that film as well, because I think if it gets the kind of attention that it deserves, and if it's done well, I may change my mind based on viewing it to see if it was actually researched well and communicated well. I think it could be a game changer. It just depends on how many people are actually willing to watch it and listen to the message that it communicates.
Where do you fall on belief of the Bible as the Word of God versus helpful anecdotes and allegories about the human experience and being a better person on this earth?
My immediate question back is, what are we talking about when we say the Word of God? Are we saying that the Bible is actually God's word that was inherently delivered through the conduit of a human hand writing it down, ergo they had no control over what they were writing? Or are we talking about the word of God being an inspirational thing? God saying, you saw and you experienced, okay? I'm going to speak through you. So write down your experience. That's where the water starts to get a little bit muddy. What
Yeah,
I
and
will say,
I bring that up because I feel like so many people believe that the Bible is the word, the direct word of God, that this stuff is immutable, it is concrete, it means what it means, again, and that's even great. It means what the pastor tells me it means, and there is no gray, there's no flexibility, and from my perspective, this is a book that was written by men, that was edited by men, that thus inherently has many flaws.
and to continue on with that line of thought, it is a book that continues to be translated by men. So not only is there the potential for fallacy built into what someone writes, but also how somebody translates what another person has written down. That's where it starts to get difficult. And we did an exercise in seminary talking about the terminology of inerrancy and what does that mean? Are we talking about the Bible being literal at all points, or can it be allegorical or metaphorical at some points? To your point, are we talking about it being the literal word of God, as in spoken from his mouth and given through the pen of somebody else, or is it inspired by God and written through someone else? And those are, again, conversations that oftentimes do not happen outside of seminary classrooms. But where I tend to fall is I'd actually have to go back and look at my assignment and how I wrote this down. But I do believe that the Bible was inspired by God in the original format, in the original language with which it was written. So as we sit here in 2023 America and we are reading what is oftentimes a translation of a translation of a translation, we have to recognize that we're not seeing the original. And if we want to see the original, we have to go back to the Greek and go back to the Hebrew. And you lose a lot of people along the way. They don't want to put in that effort. They don't want to have that conversation. They want to read it in their modern day English, and they want to create and walk by their theology based on that right there. And again, it's a difficulty, but it's not an unexpected one.
Mm-hmm. I just think it's so funny that people are so unwilling to do that work and that research, and yet they're so then willing to accept what certain people tell them it means and reject what other people tell them it means. It's like, if you're going to be that dug in about it, you have to be dug in because of empirical evidence and your own personal experience with it. It just seems so contradictory to get that dug in on something that you know so little about firsthand.
And that's where I start to really take issue with people that purport themselves to be authorities, or that other people will elevate them to the status of being authority. The easy one to pick on here is Matt Walsh. We already brought it up. Look, I don't know Matt Walsh's educational background. I don't know what he's actually researched. What I do know is that some of the things I've read from him and listened to from him, I sit back and I just say, well, that's flat out wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But because he is in a place of cultural authority, people listen to him. And it's much harder to convince somebody that their authority figure is wrong than it is to convince them that their position is wrong. Yeah.
Wow, that's a. I'll have to sit with that one. That's an interesting take on it. Huh. Yeah, because I guess what's happening in that scenario is a point of view can be proven because of different facts and different pieces of information you can bring to the conversation, whereas someone's faith in a certain leader, cultural, political person of faith, I can see where that's harder to do, and it can be like what Trump does is just tells everybody that what's happening is just a personal attack that is not based in anything real. It's just an attack, and you can dismiss it offhand because, oh, this is just another one of those attacks. Whereas it's like, no, I'm trying to prove that this guy's just an idiot.
Yeah, and that's with the people that are willing to listen. That's one of those areas that I specialize in, because if you get somebody that is willing to listen and possibly change their opinion on things, you start asking the questions of, okay, you believe this. Do you believe this because you researched it for yourself? You came to the conclusion, even if we're not talking about a, let's say, scientific issue that has empirical evidence, so on and so forth. If we're talking about a philosophical or theological issue, have you gone to primary sources? Have you done this research for yourself? Did you arrive at this conclusion for yourself? Or are you taking it at the word of somebody else who you believe has done that research? And once they come to that realization of, no, I didn't actually do it for myself, then the obvious next question is, cool. Do you want to do your research for yourself, or do you want to keep believing the easiest thing that was taught to you? And it should be no surprise that a lot of people fall into that latter camp because it's easier for them to not do the work on their end. It's sad, but we're all guilty of it at some point. And it's a lost art in our culture right now. It kind of goes back to the idea of attention spans being what they are, and also just a general busyness. But
yeah, well, you can't expect people to have the time to do that. But I do like the idea of taking the approach of, how much do you? Okay, so you don't have the time to do it. I have, I cut you that slack, and I understand that fully. How much do you understand about the knowledge of the person that you're putting up on this pedestal and taking all of their word for it? Like, you have to at least know whether or not they're reliable. And if you approach it that way, you might be able to start kind of chipping away at some of these walls.
Not only do you need to know if they're reliable, because a lot of people that are reliable, that know what they're talking about, have inherent biases. And that's okay, because they're human. But once again, if you're willing to admit that you understand what their biases are, can I get you to read or listen to a resource by a voice that is in disagreement with this person that you hold so dear? Knowing that, I'm not going to steer you wrong. And even though I have my own inherent biases, it's so complex and it's so complicated. But that's ultimately where change will begin. It's just really tough to get there.
So as we close out the night, I'm just kind of curious what your focus is going forward on this religious front. You talked about speaking to people. You see social media posts that are from a faith leader and are problematic, and you contact them directly to see if you can have a conversation and work through some of these things. What would you say is sort of your focus for 2024 in the religious sphere? What are some of the things that you're trying to accomplish, and how are you approaching that?
It's kind of twofold. So as I mentioned earlier, one of my goals, and it may not end up being a 2024 goal, the can is getting kicked down the road a little bit further, but I do want to go back to school one more time and get my PhD and study the relationship between trans people and the American Evangelical Church. Now that said, it's obviously a laser focused topic, and not everybody will be able to relate to that, but everybody will be able to learn something from that. And I would essentially become a true expert in the topic. And that's what I would love, because that opens up the doors to make some incredible social change if people are willing to listen. But I would say in the immediate, what my focus is in the religious space is separating the church from politics in general, or rather separating the church from politicians. I think it's okay to have ties to an issue and to base a stance on an issue on your faith and what the Bible has to say, so on and so forth. But what has always rubbed me the wrong way is the close tie to a particular politician or a party that has upheld this belief, and so I must vote this way going forward. That as well is incredibly difficult, but we got to start somewhere, and somebody's got to be the unpopular opinion and remind people, hey, by the way, you can be a Christian and be a Democrat. You can be a Christian and be independent. You can be a Christian and vote for Joe Biden again if he ends up running. And many people don't want to hear that. And it's not meant to be an argument where I say I'm taking this stance right here because I believe this. It's meant to be a stance of let's separate the church from the state. What a novel idea that is, and look at it from the Venn diagram of what is my duty as a Christian, what is my duty as an American, and what falls in the middle ground right here. That's how we progress forward as a Christian in the political space.
I love it, and I can't wait to follow along on your journey in exploring that and trying to advocate for that. And good luck in getting back into school to study and get to that mastery level, essentially.
Thank you very much.
Sami, it's been wonderful to talk to you tonight. I hope you had a good time.
I most certainly did. Thank you again for the opportunity. I've
Yeah.
had a great time talking with you.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for coming and chatting. We didn't get a lot of the comments, and we didn't get a lot of questions from chat, but you know, hey, the support is great and we appreciate y'all. Thank you so much for coming. Go ahead and put it in chat if you have anybody we can raid over to. If not, I will take a minute offline and figure that out. I'm going to go to my end screen, which is a schedule screen. Ignore the schedule. It's all wrong. I haven't had a chance to update it yet. So where's the best place to track and follow you, Sami?
Yeah. So Instagram is the easiest place to follow me. Pretty much everywhere. It's Sami Flair, SAMIFLAIR. Instagram tends to be like my daily focus, the glimpse into my life. I stream here on Twitch 3 days a week. I'm also on YouTube, making a variety of short form and long form content, from everything from philosophy and theology discussions to video game recaps and sports discussions. So if anything I've said tonight piques your interest, hit me up on any of those platforms, and odds are we will connect on some level.
Awesome. Thank you again, Sami, and everyone have a wonderful night. We'll talk to you soon.